Greetings viewers, Eric the Car Guy here, also known as ETCG1 on this here channel. On ETCG1 we talk about stuff. We talk about things automotive related, but we do not do repair videos. So if you're looking for repair videos, head on over to Eric the Car Guy. There will be a link in the description. For today's topic, I'd like to talk a little bit about the future of diagnostics. This is sort of spawned by an article that I read earlier this week about the use of thermal imaging to assist in diagnostics and how effective it actually is. Using thermal imaging cameras to help do diagnostics. In fact, it was said that that method is something that's been used in the manufacturing sector for quite some time, but the cost of the tools have been, well, up to this point, really prohibitively expensive. But with the advent of cheaper electronics, things are sort of trickling down. So I thought I would talk a little bit about some of the diagnostic tools that I started off with, like back when I started in this business back in the early 90s, and how it's progressed just in the time that I've been around. And it's honestly, it goes further and further every day. I'm sure that there are some of you out there that are aware of new techniques and things that I haven't even heard of. But one of the best channels for this kind of stuff, especially for like lab scope testing, that kind of thing, is Scanner Danner. And I'll post a link to his channel down there. So if you want to learn more about lab scope testing and how to use a lab scope, he's your guy. Also, Dwayne from Real Fixes Real Fast is also quite good with a scope and has quite a few videos on that. I don't have a scope, so it'd be hard for me to do videos if I don't have the tools to do that with. Any diagnostic teacher that I've ever had has always said that the most important tool that you have in diagnostics is the one between your ears. And that's absolutely true, because you can have all the fancy equipment in the world, but if you don't know how to use it or interpret the data, you're kind of lost. So why don't we start with one of the first things I started out with. Okay, this guy here, standard DVOM. This isn't the first one I had. I moved up to this one. I had a much cheaper model when I first started out. But in the days before OBD2, this was like the scan tool. This told you everything, because basically everything was a breakout chart or a troubleshooting tree, to where it said, you know, check voltage values on this particular sensor, or check resistance values on, you know, these wires at this pin location, and this would tell you whether or not a particular sensor had a failure. Because before OBD2, there weren't specific codes necessarily. There were manufacturer specific codes. Everybody had their own thing. Like Ford had their own codes, and Chevy had their codes, and then Honda had their codes, and Nissan, Jaguar, you know, all on down the line. They all had their own proprietary set of trouble codes that would come up to aid you in your diagnostic process of those particular vehicles. And many times it was through the use of a DVOM that you'd go in and check those values according to what the manufacturer's specs were, compare them. If they didn't fall within the specs, you replace it and then recheck it. In fact, one of the things that they taught us coming up in this is they said, you know, go out to a car that's actually functioning and working and check the resistance values on, like, say, the coolant temperature sensor, just so you can get a feel for what good readings are supposed to look like. And, you know, you sort of get a mental baseline. So the next time you run into a problem child and maybe it's like slightly out of spec or something, you'll know that because you've already developed like that mental Rolodex of information on a particular sensor. Now, as a flat rate technician, that happened like next to never. But, you know, the idea was there, and over time, and more diagnostics that you would do, you would develop, you know, those skills and that sort of encyclopedia of practical knowledge that you would get from doing that stuff over and over again, and you'd begin to see the patterns. You'd begin to see when something was off. So it was a little more, I mean, there were some absolutes, because when you're dealing with electricity, you know, it's there or it's not there, that kind of thing. But DVOMs, like, they can take you so far, but they're not very fast. And in a lot of today's electronics, you're talking about computer signals that happen in, you know, milliseconds. So you need something a lot faster. Or ignition events, you know, to take an ignition event and stretch it out. In the days before all of this, we had sun machines, which was like the pinnacle of diagnostic equipment. You could hook that up to an engine, and there were some people that were like wizards. In fact, I was taught by one of them, Dan Svitko, taught taught us how to use that equipment, how to read ignition waveforms and tell if something was running lean or running rich. And he could hook one of these things up to a vehicle, old carbureted things with distributors and sometimes points, or, ignition modules were just coming into vogue about that time. And he could plug that thing in and tell you, that's running rich on cylinder number 7. And he would know, and he could switch through and look at all the ignition waveform patterns and begin to see those things. So those diagnostic tools are there to help aid you, help see those things that you can't necessarily see, things that are happening in milliseconds of time. And then you can pick that apart and say, okay, well, there's where the failure is. Onward, up to 1996 model year when OBD2 came out. And I always thought it was interesting how they basically adopted the General Motors system and told everybody else in the world to do it. I thought that was awfully kind of them. Everybody else in the world, you need to have a connector that looks like this, and you need to have your codes set up this way. So all the basic codes that you would have, like for an EGR, a knock sensor, or a throttle position sensor, or any of the other sensors, were supposed to be universal across the board. And that's when these guys came in, the scan tool. So that was like the step up. In fact, when these came out initially, this was like a high dollar item. And once again, it trickles down to this, which I think I got for like $170. I've had this for like 10 years now. It seems that it starts out where, like something like this thermal imaging that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, that it starts out as a high-end diagnostic tool, but then there's a market for it. So the tool manufacturers see this, they try to find a cheaper way to make it and bring it out to the masses. And those people that get practiced at it can, develop those skills and become very good at using a specific tool or a specific tool set in order to perform those diagnostics. Because as I've often said, if you're going to be a technician and you have that kind of knack, like there are lots of different types of technicians. Some technicians are like really good with their hands, really good at taking things apart and putting them back together. I'd say I'm one of those technicians. I've always been really good at that type of thing. Then there's others that really understand the theoretical and can really delve into the diagnostic part of things. People like Scanner Danner and Dan Svitko that I talked about, and Dwayne from Real Fixes Real Fast. Those are just people I'm thinking of off the top of my head that I've seen that show an aptitude for this type of thing. They're a different type of technician. They can take those readings and tell you just about anything that you want to know. I think the same thing is going to happen. I have here, and this isn't a thermal imaging camera, but it's something that, you're 74.3 degrees, by the way. I've used this tool, and I've found this to be a useful tool. When these things first came out, these laser pointers, I used this in the, well, not a laser pointer, how about I just read the outside? These infrared thermometers, when these first came out, they were super high dollar. But the people that had them were really tricked, because you can use this for a multitude of things. He tells you a lot of things. He tells you, like a bad wheel bearing. You can find bad wheel bearings with this. You can find bad calipers with this. You can find misfires with this. You can go on each runner of the exhaust and find out which one isn't the same. So I think this thermal imaging thing has a lot of promise and shows a lot of promise for the future. And I'm curious as to see, what the manufacturers do to incorporate this kind of thing. Because say for instance with scan tools, manufacturers started coming out with their own proprietary scan tools. It started out with like maybe universal ones, but each manufacturer like made their own to work with their own vehicle. In fact, that's what they had in the days before OBD2. Many times there was a specific scan tool that would communicate with the onboard system of that vehicle, and it was only manufacturer specific. And then there were some systems that came out, I think the shop I worked at, we had a Snap-on version, and we had to plug in different modules to it, depending upon what vehicle we were working on, and it was just a whole box full of connectors in order to connect to all the different interfaces and all the different vehicles. So, it was like the Rube Goldberg of diagnostic equipment, and then OBD2 came along, kind of made that thing obsolete, sort of. We had to get 10 years in, at least. Or maybe not 10 years, maybe it was 5 or 6 years in. I don't remember how far it was before it started becoming used less and less, and digging into the box to try to get out that old diagnostic equipment. But by then, after a while, you just sort of begin to see the failures that happen with a particular vehicle. So if it comes in with a misfire, and you've had 8 other ones that have come in with a similar problem, and 6 out of those 8 had this problem, that's what you do. You go and you look for that problem first thing. Or you might do like most of us and just shotgun it and say, 8 other times it was this, we're just going to tell them it was this, I'm gonna move on to something else so I can keep making money and throw the part at it, hope it works. If it does, you know, there's an 80% chance I'm right. And if it is, throw the part on, I keep moving on. I was trying to say at some point here that the people that are good at that diagnostic type of work, and they are a specific breed of technician, if you will. So part of this video is, I guess, a little bit about those diagnostic tools and my experiences with them. The one I didn't talk about, this guy here, my power probe, that revolutionized my electrical diagnostic skills and capability. For me, that tool just opened it all up, because I used to have like little jumper wires and, you know, a test light, you know, a whole sort of box full of junk that I would use to do my electrical diagnostics. Well, that thing came along. With a push of a button, I got power or ground. I can tell if I've got power or ground in the circuit. And it's, you know, it's got an audio warning. So if I put this someplace where I can't see it and I connect something and I hear it beep, I know I've got whatever it is I'm looking for. So that helped a lot. So it's part tools, but it's also a good chunk of experience. Like I said at the beginning of the video, it's the tool between your ears, I think, as a diagnostician, that really separates the men from the boys when it comes down to that. And not all of us are cut out for that, and that's okay, because, I mean, let's face it, we do need parts hangers, which it seems to me that the manufacturers are going in that direction. They're making vehicles that seems more modular, to where if there is a problem, it's like swap out the whole system. Like, okay, there's a problem with this system. Well, you don't tinker around with it. It's not like back in the days of carburetors and things like that, where it ain't running right. So you can go through and rebuild the carburetor and, you know, adjust everything and dial it all in. It's kind of really artsy. There was like an art to all that stuff. And all that's kind of gone away to be, you know, you plug something in, it says, replace this part. And that's what most of us do. But then there are the rest of us who do this diagnostic work. And as far as the future of diagnostics, I thought it was very interesting that these thermal imaging cameras are coming into vogue, and that they're being used more and more. And I guess what I'm going to do for part B of this video is I'm going to pose the question to you. I mean, what are your experiences with diagnostics? Both as a DIY. I mean, well, let's face it. I mean, there's technicians who do things professionally, but there's also DIYs that are sometimes very skilled, that can figure these things out. I've seen some DIYs figure things out that they shouldn't have been able to figure out, but somehow they did. And good for them. So are you one of those type of people? Are you one of those diagnosticians? Are you one of those people that's what you do? You're the go-to guy when people have a drivability or an electrical issue or something like that. If so, what tools are you using? And is this thermal imaging something that you think you're going to be using in the future? And we can talk about it, not only here, but over at EricTheCarGuy.com, where I have a discussion going about every video I make these days. And I will have a link in the description to discussion about this video. Isn't that special and convenient for you? Speaking of convenience, if you have automotive questions, I would ask that you head over to EricTheCarGuy.com, type in a couple of keywords into the search function at the top of the page, and you might just get an answer. If that's not the case, feel free to sign up for our forum. It's absolutely free. All you need is an email address, and be sure to respond to the confirmation email that should show up. If it doesn't, check your spam folder, bulk folder, whatever you need to check to find out where that went, because you'll need to do that in order to complete your registration process. And once you've done that, you can ask your question over at our forum, and we will do our very best to try and answer it for you. If you wish to connect with me socially, you can do that at Google+, Facebook, and Twitter. And I close each of my videos with, well, you know what I say. Here, let me see if I can do it with my mind. That's right. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty.